We all know reality doesn't always match our expectations, and yet it can be very tempting to compare ourselves to an idealized version of ourself and our life living in our mind. So today I want to talk about expectations versus reality, Stepmom edition. It's common for step-parents to hear things like, well, you knew what you were getting into, and feel like that couldn't be further from the truth. I'm Deanna, I'm a mom and a stepmom, and I understand how complicated blended family life can be. It's impossible for anyone to anticipate the twists and turns that lie ahead in life, but when we get really rigid about what we think things should look like or feel like, we miss being present in our actual real life. So today I want to talk about 3 areas that it's really common for us to maybe have unrealistic expectations. First, of ourselves, second, of our marriages, and third, of our children. Let's start with our expectations of ourselves. As women, I feel like so many of us already struggle with this. We feel like we're supposed to have it all, do it all, be it all. And when we become stepmoms, it can feel like we're coming in with this invisible checklist of all the things we're supposed to be and how we're going to show up. We may even feel like we have to prove we belong, even if it's just to ourselves. And that can really set us up to feel burnt out and even resent our family. Whenever I start to feel that way, I try to check in and ask myself, did anyone actually ask me to do this? And what will happen if I don't? And the answers to those questions will usually give me some clarity about whether this is something that is a priority or whether this is a situation where I just need to manage my expectations. So a good personal example of this from my life, something that I have felt like I struggled with as a stepmom from the very beginning, is household management. Home organization, meal planning, managing schedules, all of that. And it's taken me a long time to really accept and grasp that it isn't that I'm failing at all these things. I just have really unrealistic expectations of how it should all look. Life can get messy and homes that are lived in get messy, and we're not failing if it doesn't look like it belongs on a Pinterest board or the home edit, and I have nothing against those things. But we are bombarded with images and expectations that we sometimes hold ourselves up to, that our lives should look aesthetic and curated in a way that just isn't realistic for actual real life, especially when you're adjusting to everything that comes with a blended family. In my first few years as a stepmom, we moved like 4 times and I had a baby and a lot of other big things happened. And during that time, I still felt like I was somehow supposed to be putting this all together in such a beautiful, functional way that our home should just feel so wonderful all the time. And looking back, I was really hard on myself about all of that. I have accepted now that it's not always going to look that way. Sometimes our house will look really nice. Sometimes it will feel really organized. Sometimes there will be meals planned. Other times it's a little bit fly by the seat of your pants, and that's okay. What I want you to take away is that what has changed for me is not that I got better at managing my household, even though I have made an honest effort. What I've gotten better at is accepting the reality and managing my expectations. Just knowing that I can't be a present mom and also have the most organized pantry. And if you can, if you're the kind of person for whom having a perfectly organized pantry actually makes you feel more at peace and able to show up as your most present self, that's great. We all have our own strengths and areas that we care more about and things that we need to prioritize for our own mental health and our own peace of mind. And I think for me, it was like I felt this external pressure to have my home present a certain way, and so I've had to just let that go and accept that it's really about how it's functioning for the people who live here. And when I come back to those 2 questions, who is asking me to do this and what will happen if I don't, it always helps me put in perspective and figure out if this is a priority or not, if this is something that I'm putting pressure on myself to do or something that will actually be helpful to me in my life and or to my family. Another little example that's kind of funny in our life is that I don't eat meat, and for a while I felt like I was supposed to prepare meat for my family because they all eat it, even though I don't. And this is something that, again, it's a little bit of a running joke now with my husband, but it just grosses me out. I don't want to prepare meat. And so I now understand, like, I don't have to come up with meals that we're all going to eat. I'm probably not going to get everybody on board with meatless Mondays, and I don't want to touch the chicken. So there's going to be a little bit of a figuring out the meals as we go, and it's going to look a little different than for a family that all has the same dietary preferences. My unwillingness to prepare food I don't eat and inability to keep my spices alphabetized doesn't make me a failure. And I promise you, whatever area of your home life you may feel like is out of your control and you just can't get right doesn't make you a failure either. But domestic life isn't the only area that we as stepmoms can get hard on ourselves and sometimes have unrealistic expectations. Another one is sort of what we're bringing to the table emotionally and how we're feeling connected to our families. I've mentioned this before, but when I was becoming a stepmom, I read a bunch of parenting books. And it wasn't because I was trying to take over as a parent. I just wanted to show up in my most prepared way and be able to contribute. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But what I've learned over time is it isn't my job to fix everybody's feelings about anything or manage anybody's emotions or repair all the relationships. That's not your job. It's not your job as a stepmom. And honestly, it's not your job as a mom either. Now that I am both a stepmom and a mom, I feel more confident as a stepmom because there are things that I can feel sort of intuitively as a mom that I realize I was being a little hard on myself about as a stepmom. So for me now as a mom and as a stepmom, I'm here to create a safe environment for the kids. I want them to feel loved and supported. I want to help create a calm and playful environment for them, but I don't need to be everything to everybody. I just need to be a steady adult in their lives. That is enough. And you are enough. You don't need to teach them anything or prove anything or earn your place in your home. Just show up who you are with your strengths and be authentic and connect with them. And I promise you, that is enough. The next area of expectations I want to talk about is marriage. So when you marry someone who has kids, you kind of skip the honeymoon period, where other couples are getting used to cohabitating and figuring out how they live together and what that is like. We are diving right into the deep end of domestic life, family life, and everything that comes with that. So it feels much more abrupt, and it may feel sometimes like we missed out on an experience that other people got to have, something that might help bring a certain foundation to their marriage that our marriage didn't get. And the truth is, it is different. We are building our marriage and our relationship while managing a family system that's already in place. And that system is complex and has pressure points that people who are starting from just a marriage and then bringing kids into it don't have to contend with from the beginning. So if we are comparing ourselves to first families and comparing our struggles as a couple to the struggles of a couple that didn't have kids already, it's going to feel like we're doing something wrong, and we're not. It's just different. It's a unique set of challenges. I would choose my marriage again and again, and I would even argue there are advantages to coming into an existing family. My husband and I had to get on the same page right away and be a team in a way that a lot of people don't have to do until they are having kids. It does change the dynamic of your relationship, so if you start out like that, you're already there. And we've consistently been on a team together as parents from the very beginning. And I really think that that has been a huge benefit in our relationship. So I think if you can reframe it instead of thinking about what you don't get, these other couples get time alone together before they have kids, we get the opportunity to kind of set the tone of the relationship from the very beginning with kids. And so we're already more accustomed to making time for romance and making time together within family life than people who don't start out that way might be. I also noticed that when we had our own baby, it just didn't feel like as a big of a change to me as it did for other first-time moms that I know, because I was already a stepmom. So there were changes, yes, that were unique to having a baby, but there was also things that were just family life that I was already used to. It's pretty well known that women tend to take on more of the invisible labor of running a home, and stepmoms are no exception to that. So if you come into a relationship and then you take on a lot of parenting duties or you take on a lot of household duties, that can become a quick path to resentment as well. So you want to make sure that you're working in agreements, not assumptions. And again, this is a good time to check back into those questions. Who is asking me to do this, and what will happen if I don't? If your partner is actually asking you to do more than you feel comfortable or are able to do, that's a conversation that you guys need to have together. But it also could be that you're taking things on that they will just do if you don't. And so always have a conversation about it, never make assumptions. I have talked about this before in my video on disengaging as a stepmom, disengaging without disconnecting, and I will link that here below if you're interested in that. But there was definitely a time in our marriage when I had taken on a lot of the parenting that I didn't necessarily need to take on. And it was actually causing more of a challenge with my relationship with my stepkids. And it was actually my husband's idea for me to kind of back off and just try to be the fun, cool person again and let him deal with some of the harder parenting stuff. And it really did reset our whole dynamic. We weren't really sure how or if it would work, and it was pretty inefficient and felt kind of silly because I would literally be texting him from the same room like, hey, can you deal with this right now? But it really did help us reset, and it kind of got me out of that impulse of reacting to the kids and always trying to step in and correct and parent, and gave him the opportunity to get back in there and do that as a dad. And it also kind of reminded me, like, sometimes I'm getting involved where I probably don't need to be, and it's better for my relationship with the kids for me to just kind of hang back and it show up in a way that is a little bit more fun. Not all the time and not forever. Sometimes I still have to parent, and sometimes the parenting part isn't always only fun. But by stepping back a little bit and in accepting your partner's role as a parent also and giving them the space to show up in that way, you're helping protect your relationship with the kids. I think it's also important to note here that that only worked because we had decided on it and because we have good communication about it going in. I wouldn't recommend texting your partner like, hey, can you deal with this? If that's not something you guys have already discussed and set up. It could come off very passive aggressive in that context. But for us, it totally worked because he knew exactly what I meant. And I did have to accept that sometimes he'd handle it in a different way than I would have, or maybe he would just decide not to handle it at all. And I would just need to stay back on that one because that's what we decided to do. All of that to say that as part of managing your expectations when it comes to household labor and parenting responsibilities, just make sure that you are communicating and, again, working from agreements, not assumptions. You don't want to just assume that they're going to do all of these things because they're the real parent and you're the step parent, any more than you don't want them to assume that you're going to do it because you're the step mom. So you just want to make sure you're clear on who's doing what and you're helping each other out. And again, coming at it as a team. And one more area of expectation versus reality within a marriage that I want to touch on is insecurities that can come with being the second wife. So we have an expectation sometimes when we think about what it's going to be like to be married or to start, your life together with somebody, that you're going to have all these firsts together. You're going to do all these things together for the first time and have these shared experiences. And when you're a step parent, you are often a second wife, which means that maybe they have done some of this before. Maybe they already had a wedding. Maybe they already had a honeymoon. And all I want to say about that is just try to let that go. At the risk of sounding incredibly cheesy, you are who you are today in part based on the experiences that you've had in your life up to this point. And so are they. So no, you may not be the first wife, but that doesn't make you any less chosen, and it doesn't make this marriage any less important or valuable. Again, we have sort of a cultural expectation that people fall in love and get married and have a family, but the reality for many people is it doesn't always happen in exactly that order and in exactly that way. And finally, in our expectations versus reality of what our connection time together with our partner might look like when there are kids in our family is going to be different than it is when there are no kids. That is true whether you're a parent or a step parent. And so I just think it's really important, again, to figure out how that works for you. You may not be able to do a date night every week, but I do think it's possible to carve out time together and to make that a priority. My husband and I pretty much always hang out together after the kids are down. We don't go to separate rooms and watch separate shows. We spend that time together. We may decide to do different things depending on the evening, but we really do make it a priority to connect with each other at the end of the day. even if we had to do a little bit of divide and conquer with the kids and the bedtimes and all of that stuff. So the expectation may look like romantic getaways or fancy restaurants for date nights, and the reality may be much more humble than that. It might just be hanging out on the couch, talking about your day, or laying near each other, reading or watching a show together. But that time is valuable. That time together matters, and I really think just making it a priority goes a long way for the health of your relationship. Another area of stepmom life that might feel like expectations and reality don't match is with the kids. Your relationship with the kids, their behavior, what it's like to be part of a family. All of this may look and feel very different than what you might have imagined. And any parent can tell you that's true for them too. It's a wild ride. And I think part of the joy of having children in your life is that they challenge you in these unique ways that you just couldn't have planned for. And I think that that is a wonderful part of it. But there are unique challenges with being a step parent. There are times where the kids might kind of ebb and flow with you. They may lean in a little bit more. They may push you away. That is totally normal. I think one of the biggest things that I've learned is neutral isn't negative. There was a period of time when one of my stepkids just seemed very indifferent to me, and that didn't feel great at first because we had been closer and then we weren't, and now we are again. But now I understand that that is just a part of their development. That's normal ebbs and flows, and it might be a little bit different as a stepmom than as a mom, but it's totally normal and okay. My son is still very much in his mom phase, and that feels great, and I love getting that time together. I know as he gets older, there might be times when he pushes me away too, and again, I'm prepared for that as much as one can be. But I do think, even though I haven't experienced it with my own son yet, that it feels a little bit different as a step parent. Again, I've talked about this before. I just think our foundation feels maybe a little less solid as a step parent, and so we might feel a little bit more sensitive to some of those shifts because we kind of feel like we have to earn their love. And in a way we do, because this relationship does have to be built, trust has to be earned. It is going to be a little bit different than just being a parent in that way. But that doesn't mean that when you experience little pulls away or things like that, that it's necessarily personal or that it's permanent. A couple of years ago, I wouldn't have guessed that my oldest stepkid and I would be as close as we are now, and that there would be such an ease in our relationship. So I'm really grateful for that. And I think some of it, again, is just the passing of time and sort of their own developmental things that they're going through. But we can support that by the way that we show up. And so just being consistent and not pushing, I think, is so key. And I talked in another video about seeing kids like cats or puppies and having different needs. Some kids need a lot more attention and some kids need more space. So if you're interested in that, I will link it below. But I do think some of the tactics I talk about in that have been really helpful. So if you think about it like you're zooming out and looking at your relationship with the kids as a whole over time in sort of the long game, I think that that's great to just remember that it's normal to have these ebbs and flows, and the best thing you can do is just keep being stable and consistent. But then when we zoom in, there's also like extremely normal, but really unpredictable moods that kids have. And again, I have experienced this with all the kids. I think it's just part of being a parent at all. But as a step parent, sometimes you're just jumping right into it and you're not as prepared for it because you didn't start out from the very beginning. So kids can be moody and their moods can change, like the weather in Michigan where I'm from. And that can just kind of knock you off your game a little bit. So my biggest tip for that is remind yourself, it is not your job to manage their emotions. They can just have their feelings. The feelings are welcome. All the behavior is not necessarily welcome, but the feelings are all allowed. And once I stopped trying to make everybody feel better all the time and think that it was my job to make everybody happy, this part got easier. Sometimes you'll be having a great time with the kids. Everybody will be laughing and all of a sudden somebody's crying and a door is slamming. And for me, that triggered this feeling of like, I have to fix this. And I still really, really struggle with that. But I do think that when we just accept their feelings and remember that they are normal and they are allowed and it's not about us, it helps a lot. I had an acting teacher who's also a stepmom who once said, feelings are like farts. They stink the place up, it feels overwhelming, but you don't have to be afraid of them, you just move through it. And I think about that a lot with kids. Feelings are like farts. And that's actually a good segue to my next point about expectations versus reality with kids, which is they will probably make fart jokes when you don't want them to. They are human, and you are not going to have an always polite kid who always says the appropriate thing all the time. And just remember, they are human. And this may sound like a very obvious statement, but understanding that somebody is human and really embracing their humanity and being interested in getting to know who they really, really are two different things. There's sort of this idea that, well, of course they're human, of course they're going to say silly things, and you may think that's fine, but I've been surprised sometimes how embarrassed I feel or sometimes angry I feel when they're not behaving the way that I think they should be. And we just have to remind ourselves, again, they're little kids, and these are normal parts of growing up. To be clear, I am not saying to just accept disrespectful or unkind behavior from your stepkids. I'm just saying that as adults, I do think that we can adjust our expectations to be a little bit more realistic for kids. They tend to have really, really wacky senses of humor, and if we can kind of try to get in there with them and meet them where they are, we can get to know what is unique about them and find all these fun, delightful little quirks about them. And I think they feel that when we're actually interested in them and what they have to say and not how we think they should perform. And I'm not saying this is easy or that I'm perfect at it. Just yesterday I had all three in the car and they were all saying just the most ridiculous things. And if you're a parent, you've probably heard 6, 7 and skibbity riz and all these ridiculous words. And then somehow toenail fungus was just being said over and over. And I really felt like I was gonna lose it. And so again, I do like sometimes let them and just kind of go with it when they're on these goofy things. And in that moment I was like, guys, I'm putting on some music that I want to put on. And they actually didn't fight me on it. They kind of stopped and I put on some music that would put me in a better mood and it was fine. So it's okay to kind of hit your limit with some of this, but I just think when we're always micromanaging what they say, when we're always shutting down their humor or their silliness, then we're missing out on a lot of quality time with them. And connected to this idea of accepting them for who they are, not how they perform, another area I would encourage you to just manage your expectations as a step parent is around how much you're going to teach them or the values you're going to instill in them. This was something I thought about quite a bit early on as a stepmom, and I remember actually writing out like family values and things like that. And I don't actually think that that's totally wrong or a bad idea, but what I have learned, at least for me, is I think that had a lot more to do for me with figuring out how I wanted to show up than it was necessarily for them. We don't want them to feel like we're saying, do as I say, not as I do. So I think it actually makes the most sense to be clear with yourself about the values you would like to instill and the life skills that you would want them to have. And then you can just plant those little seeds and that will be a lot more authentic and effective. They will be able to observe who you are and how you show up in the world. And you can't control what they do with that, but you can have an impact in that way. Just remember, no one's reality matches their expectations all of the time. So if you feel yourself kind of spinning out like, this is not what I expected, this is different than I planned, again, I always start with those first questions of, well, where does that expectation come from? Who is asking that of me? Or is this something that I just came up with as an expectation? And what will happen if it's different? What will happen if I don't do it this way, or if I pivot, or if I adjust? And a lot of times that will guide you and you will be able to be much more present in what's actually happening right now. It doesn't mean that you're settling for less or that you're lowering the bar. It just means that you're being realistic with what is in front of you today. I'm curious which one of these resonates the most with you. Do you find yourself having unrealistic expectations of yourself or your marriage or your kids? And do you have any funny stories of expectation versus reality that you'd like to share? If so, please comment below. We would love to hear from you. I'd love to keep the conversation going in the comment section. As always, thank you so much for spending your time with me today, and I'll see you next time. Let's start with our expectations.